Hey, welcome back. So in today's video, I'm going to show you how I built a simple full stack CRUD application using Nextjs on the front end, Mongoose to connect with our MongoDB Compas database, Axios to connect our front end to back end, Tailwind CSS for a little bit of styling. So a quick demonstration of this app. Here we're updating an existing note, and as you can see, we're just typing in listed here, and we notice that the update took place on our front end. And the cool thing is, if we click on new note, we have the ability to enter in a new note as well. We'll type in our title first, and then we will type in the content. We'll click submit. We'll hit the home button to go back to our home screen, and we see that we have our notes listed here. And all of this is being stored within our MongoDB Compas database on our local machine. We refresh our database and we can see our new note listed. So if this is something you're interested in, stay tuned and I'll walk you through it step by step on how I built this application. Okay, in our text editor, let's navigate into the main directory and type in the command npx create-next-app./ This is going to create that app in the main directory. We're going to say no to TypeScript today. The ES link, we're going to say yes. The SRC directory, yes. And the app directory, no. And for the alias, you can just type enter. Once this is finished installing, we want to run the command npm run dev in the main directory, and this is going to initiate our Nextjs application. If you click on that local host 3000 or whatever your local host is, it should launch your Nextjs application, and from here you can see the main Nextjs layout. So next steps, we will be cleaning up our front end layout and starting to add in a little bit more of the styling to our notes application. So to begin that cleanup process, let's navigate into our CRUD folder. Let's navigate down to the SRC, then styles, and let's remove everything that's listed here. Now I prefer a dark background, so I'm going to set the background color to black and the text color to white, but you're more than welcome to set it to any color of your preference. And once we save it, we see that the changes did take effect in our application. Now let's navigate to the pages folder and into index.js. And I just want to remove everything that's listed here so that we can get a clean slate. Let's remove the class on main as well and type in hi. And once we do and we save it, we see that it shows up just fine. We'll clean this up a little bit more as well. And now the next thing that we'll do is we'll begin to add in the Tailwind CSS styling for our notes application. And we'll talk through that in the upcoming video. Okay, so the first styling we want to add is to our main layout. So we want to add in class name, and I'm just going to type in some Tailwind styling here, so just bear with me. And the next thing we want to do is set up our navbar, and our navbar is going to hold two links. One is going to navigate back to the home window, and the other one is going to be for our create note URL. So I'm going to add some styling here for the overall nav, and then the next thing we want to do is import link, and link is going to come from Next itself. And once we've imported link, we want to type in the link tag, and within that tag we're going to add in home, because this is going to represent the home link, and the href for this is just going to be slash. And I'm going to add in some styling, so just bear with me while I type in this styling for this home button, or home link I should say. And once we save, we see we have the home link appear on the window. So I'm just going to copy this particular link and paste the next one right next to it. And this is going to be for new note. So I'm just going to remove home and type in new note. And I'm going to change the URL path to create note. We haven't created this page just yet, but we'll do that in the next video. So just hang in there with me and we'll finish building out our layout. Okay, so I think what I want to do is I want to move the navbar into a components folder. So let me go ahead and inside of the SRC, inside of pages, create a components folder. And inside of the components folder, I'm going to go ahead and create a file named navbar.js. And inside of this navbar.js, I'm going to type in the RFCE extension and I'm gonna go back to index.js, and I'm just gonna cut the header out of the navbar.js. And once we cut this out, we'll go back into the we'll cut it out of the index.js, and we'll go back into the navbar.js, and we'll paste it in and make sure we save it. That way, when we go back into our index.js, we can just type in the less than sign navbar and hit tab, and it should automatically import it in. And once you get it imported in, I hit save, and of course I forget to import link. So I'll go ahead and import link and click save, and voila, we have our navbar back. Okay, so now that we have our navbar back, let's go ahead and build out the main section of our notes app. So I'll type in section, and just hang in here with me while I type in some Tailwind CSS for styling. This is going to be the main feed where all of our notes will be placed. And from here, I'm going to create an unordered list and give it a class name and some simple styling. This is just going to be an unordered list of all of the notes that we created in our database, and I'm going to list those notes out. From here, just give it a little bit more styling as well. And next, I'm just going to type in what the note itself will look like. So we have our note title, we have our note content, we have a edit button, and of course a little bit of styling here with our edit button. And once we're done with that, we're going to add a delete button as well. And the only thing that I'm going to do with this delete button is just change the color to give it a little more of a red feel. And let's add in a few more notes just to see what it looks like, to make sure our layout is as desired, and it is. And from here, the next thing we want to do is create our create note.js page. This is going to be where we create our notes. Just make sure it's in the pages directory, and let's add in our boilerplate template. And from here, let's just save it, and let's make sure that we can navigate to this page and it's working as designed. Let's click on new note, and it goes to the create note page. So from here, the first thing I want to do is let's kind of clean up this page a little bit, and let's give it the same structure that we have throughout the rest of our application. So I'm gonna go inside of the index.js, and I'm gonna copy the class name because I want the same max width and the same layout, and I'm gonna add it to the div inside of the create note page. Then within that div, I'm going to add in the navbar, and this is going to give me the same navbar with the home and the new note links on at the top of the page. Then under the navbar, I want to add in a section, and for this section, again, I want it to look the same way the home page looks. So I'm just going to copy that section and paste it in right here. And once we've done that, let's add in a H2 that says create note, just so that the user knows that they're on the create note page. And we'll add in a class name of text center, which is just going to center the text on the page. Once we save it, we'll see it appear on the window. And underneath that, let's add in another div. Inside of this div, let's go ahead and add in our class information. Now, this particular div is going to hold the create note form. This isn't going to be anything too immaculate, but I do want to give it a little bit of styling. The main things I want to call out from here is we have a form. Inside of the form, we have an input. And in the input, the first one, we want to set the type to text. Make sure that we set the ID to title. And let's make sure that we add in a placeholder. The placeholder is just going to be title. Since I'm not adding in any labels, just want to make sure we have a placeholder there. And we're going to copy it, and you know what, we'll need to update these to content and the placeholder to be content, but I think I'm going to put this in a separate div so that it styles a little better. But let me just see what it looks like. Yeah, this isn't quite exactly what I was hoping for, so let's just go ahead and cut this, and let's add in another div. And inside of that div, let's add in this input. And with this input, I think I want to change it to a text area and give it a little bit of space. So I'm gonna give it a margin top of 2 or 3, so that there's a little bit of space between the title and the content. And then let's just change the input to text area so that it gives a larger block. This is just personal preference. You can make it to whatever you like or for your own personal desires. But at the end, we'll just change the closing tag so that it gives the traditional closing tag there. And we'll add in a button with a type of submit so that once we've updated or once we've added in the note information, um, um, it knows to submit this information to the back end. So we'll just add in type submit right there. And I'm going to give it a class name and a little bit of styling just so that it aesthetically looks good. And there we go. All right, so next, let's just give this a once over to make sure that everything looks pretty good. Okay, we should be good to go. Now, the next thing we want to do is connect our database. I'm going to be using Mongodb Compas. I'm not using the Atlas in this video, but if you're interested, just let me know in the comments and I'll be happy to do so. Otherwise, let's go ahead and launch our Mongodb Compas. And once you've installed it, it should give you a window very similar to this. You want to click on New Connect, and then from there, you want to click on Create the plus mark. The plus mark next to database will launch Create Database. I'm going to name this database Nextjs CRUD, and I'm going to name the collection name Notes. And once you've done so, just click Save, and we can go back to our text editor. And the next thing we want to do is create the model. The model is going to hold the schema that's going to hold the notes that goes within our database. We'll create this model folder in the main CRUD directory. And within the model folder, let's add in a file named notes.js. And from here, we just want to add in the mongoose adapter, which is going to allow us to interact with the MongoDB database. Then from there, we're just going to type in our normal schema, and we're going to have a title, a content, and a created at. You can include whatever you wish, but for demonstration purposes, I'm going to keep it simple and just use these fields. Then from there, just want to make sure that we export this and export this schema model so that we can use it in other sections of the video. And once we've done this, the next thing that we want to do is be able to submit notes from our front end to our back end. So in order to do so, the first thing we want to do is bring in use state. And we're going to use axios as our way to communicate with our back end. You could use other functionalities, but I like to use axios. And now that I think about it, I don't know if I brought in axios or mongoose, and let's look in the package.json, and nope, I sure don't see it. So let's go ahead and go back to our terminal and let's stop our server. And from here, once we stop it, terminate the batch, let's type in npm I mongoose, and this is going to install mongoose, and then we'll space and let's type in axios. And once it finishes the installation, let's go ahead and restart our server. Let's just make sure that it installed, and in the package.json, there's axios, there's mongoose, so we are good to go. So now that we have that installed, let's go ahead and set up our state to capture our title and to capture our content. This is the way that this is what we want to use within our form to capture what's entered by the user. Then the next thing we want to do is create a function called handle submit, and we're going to make this a arrow function. And within this, we want to create a variable named note object. And within this object, we want to be able to identify the title and the content. So we'll create a key named title, and we'll set that equal to the value of title. And we'll also create one named content and set that equal to, or set it to content as well. And let's go ahead and let's just console.log it. I'm not going to test it right now, but I do want to have the ability to see it in the console. Kind of helps me debug it just in case I run into some errors along the way. And then from here, the next thing we want to do is be able to communicate with our database. So let's go ahead and leverage Axios to help us with that. And this is going to be a post request. And within this post request, it's going to go to the API folder, which is within the pages folder. That's something cool about Next.js. And we'll do /new note. We haven't created this endpoint just yet, but we're going to in a minute. And from there, we want to pass in the note. We want to post the note object. And once we post that note object, then we want to, we just want to send in an alert that the note is added. I'm not sure if I'm going to add this in just yet, but I like to go ahead and just add those in as because they're good user features. And then from there, we want to scroll down to the actual form itself. And the first thing we want to do is add in the on submit option within the form. And what we want to do is we want to be able to handle the submission of the form of that variable that we just created. This is going to submit the note object. And within that note object, we want to be able to capture the title, which is going to come from the title input. So within that, we'll include on change. And within that on change, we want to wait for the event. That's what's going to be changing. We're going to wait for the event. And once that event takes place, then we want to set the title. And we want to set the title with the event.target.value. This is the value that is coming from our front end. Now we want to do the exact same thing for our content, and our content is inside of the text area. So I'm just going to copy this to make it a little easier for me. And right here, instead of it saying set title, I'm going to change the title to content and make sure you have a capital C. And once we have that, we'll give it a quick once over to make sure we're not missing anything. Then the next thing we want to do is create the backend API. So inside of the API folder, we want to create a file named newnote.js. This is going to match the exact same endpoint for our post request. Inside of this, I'm going to include the note model. I'm going to bring in mongoose so that we can connect with the database. And then the main thing here is we want to create the async function with the handler. If we get a request that's not a post request, we want to send back an error. Otherwise, we want to create a try catch block, and we want to be capturing the title and the content from the body. Then we want to await that connection to MongoDB, and we're just using the exact same syntax. Once we have that connection, let's just console in the log that is connected. Then we want to create a variable for our new note, which has the title and the content. We want to save it once we've created it. Let's send it to the console just to make sure it's working correctly. And we'll add in some error syntax. And because this is a local database, let's be sure to finally close it. Then from there, let's make sure that we export our default handler. And once we've done that, let's go back to the terminal and let's see what we're getting now that we're saving. And let's see here. Okay, no errors. So I'm going to make an attempt to create a new post from the front end to make sure we don't get any errors. And when I hit submit, looks like I forgot the L in the model. So let's go back to the models folder in notes.js, add in the L. Sorry about that. Hit save and no errors. Let's refresh our screen. Okay, so then let's just try to create a note from the front end and see if we get any errors this time. So this is our title, and now we're just adding in some content here. Let's click submit, and we see it in the console. Now for the true witness test, let's go to our database and let's refresh the screen and go here and click on open new tab, and voila, we have it in our database. So the next thing that we want to do is be able to display our notes to our home screen. So back in our index.js, the first thing we want to do is bring in use state. And of course, this is going to be from React. The next thing that we'll need in order to communicate with our database is axios. So let's go ahead and import axios as well. Okay, and once we have those two modules brought in, we want to go ahead and have the ability to communicate directly with our database from here. And the way we're going to do so is by using get static props. So we're just going to follow the standard syntax in order to create this function. And the first thing we want to do is bring in mongoose. This is going to allow us to interact with our database. Next thing we want to do is create a variable, or excuse me, the next thing we want to do is bring in the notes model, excuse me, not a variable. We want to bring in the notes model so that we know what format or structure we're looking for once we connect with our database. And inside of this asynchronous function, the next thing we need to do is await that connection to Mongoose. So we're going to type in our database URL here, and just make sure that you don't make any typos. And I probably should have, it probably would have been smarter for me just to copy this versus trying to make sure that I type it out each time, because it's very easy to make a mistake. But just make sure that you double check it, and it'll probably be easier if you copied and paste this. So from here, want to make sure that we include our use new URL parser. Want to set that to true. And with this connection, once we make the connection, then we want to console.log our database is connected, just so that we can have some feedback in the terminal as a form of logging. And from there, let's just scroll down a little bit and give us a little more room. Then let's create the variable named notes. This is once we have our database connected, then we want to create the variable named notes. Notes is going to look in the database, find all of the notes and sort them by newest to oldest. So the oldest will be at the bottom and the newer notes will be at the top. That's just a personal preference. I do want to go ahead and console.log the notes just to make sure that we're getting them back. And what we want to return, this is what we're going to be returning to our front end. So we want to return props, and the format that we want when we get our props, it's just going to come back to us in the form of JSON data. That could be a little difficult to manipulate. So we want to parse through that data by using some JavaScript functionality. We want to be able to stringify, and we want to send it back to the front end as stringified notes. So once we have this set up, the next thing that we want to do is just make sure that everything looks good. Scroll down to where our front end setup is located, and we want to pass in the notes prop. And from here, I'm going to create a loop so that I can map over the notes in the database, and I'm going to display them in the unordered list. So right below the unordered list, I'm going to use some JavaScript magic here, and I'm going to type in notes.map. And within that, we want to create the variable, which will be a note, and we also want to add in that second parameter, which is the index. And what we want to return back is this particular list item. And what we'll do from here is, instead of the hard-coded text that we have right now, we're going to use JavaScript to make that dynamic. First thing we'll need to do is include the index. This is so that we don't get any errors back from Nextjs. Then we want to use the brackets and do a note.title. This is going to loop through the database and present all of the note titles. And right here with the H5, we want to clip out that content and put note.content. This is going to loop through the database and display all of our note content. Once we've done that, let's go ahead and click save and refresh our browser. And we're still on the create note screen, so let's just go back to home, and we can see that we have the note from the database listed here. Let's click on create note just to make sure that it's working properly. This will be second post. Here is our second post, and click submit. And once it refreshes, let's go back to home. Voila, it's there. So now that we have that set up, the next thing that we want to do is work on our update post. So now let's go back to our index.js, and we know that we're going to be able to update posts from the main screen. So we'll go ahead and bring in a variable for visibility. This is what's going to allow the form to be visible on click. So we're going to set the initial state to false. Then we want to create a state for our title, and we want to make sure that we set the title. This is what we're going to capture from our user input when an update is made. We also want to make sure that we're capturing the content as well. So we'll create the use state for our content here as well. And once we have our use state connected for both, the next thing that we want to do is create the or we want to make sure that we're capturing the note ID, because once you click on the individual note, you'll click on the edit button, it's going to grab that note's ID, and that's what's going to be found from the database, and it's going to allow you to manipulate that note. From there, we want to create a variable for our edit form. That form is going to hold the title, the content, and the note ID. And right here within the edit form variable, we want to set the visibility. So with this, we want to set the visibility that if we toggle it, it is currently either the two states that it either be open or closed, of course. And once it is open, we want to capture the title, and we want to set the title to be title. We want to capture the content, and we'll set content to content. And we'll also do that for the note ID as well. We'll capture the note ID and we'll set that to be the note ID. So once we've captured this information, the next thing we want to do is create the variable to update the note itself. This is just the form visibility, and this is going to be an asynchronous function. And right here, I named this variable to do. I probably will change it. It could be named anything, but for sake of consistency, it should probably be named note ID, not to do ID. Then we want to pass in or create a note object, and within that note object, of course, we want to grab the value of the title, and we'll set that title to title, and we'll set the content to content. And of course, whenever I do this type of whenever we're capturing this information from the database, I like to make sure that we are console.logging it, so that's another form of login and we can see it. So I want to make sure that we set it to the console first, and then once we set it to the console, then we can await the update itself to the back end. And this is going to be a put request, so it'll be await axios.put, and the API for this, we haven't created it yet. It's going to be in that same folder as new note, but this is going to be update note. And pay attention closely to the syntax here. You want to make sure that you put a question mark, ID, the equal sign, $, and then the brackets for the note ID itself. And this particular function is going to take this is going to take a second parameter or a second argument of the note object. Then once we've made that connection, we want to provide the update, and just for my own personal preference, I always set the window location reload to false. So now that we've created the update, while we're here, we'll just go ahead and create the delete note variable, and we need to create this endpoint as well. Going to look very similar to what we just created. It is going to use a axios request. This isn't something that we have to wait on. We're going to be able to immediately grab it, and we're going to create the API endpoint. With this one, it's going to be API. We know all of the Nextjs APIs are in that API folder, / and then we'll create the delete note endpoint. And let's, just as we did with the update request, we just want to make sure that we use the correct syntax here. And once we use the correct syntax, then we want to make sure that we delete the note, and we do not want to update the window. We want to stay on that same screen. So now that we've made this front end updates, the next thing that we want to do is add in the visibility of our form. So right below the delete button, want to add in the brackets for the JavaScript syntax. And what this is saying is that if it's visibility, and meaning that it's true, then we want to display what we're typing in here. So the first thing we want is just a div, just to keep everything within a div so that it's contained. Then I want to add in the update now header. I'm going to center this text just for aesthetics, but it's nothing relevant to the functionality of the program. From here, I want to add in a form, which is pretty relevant. Adding in some simple styles to the form so that it matches the overall layout. Within the form, want to add in a input. I put the input within divs just because of how I want the form laid out. From here, adding in the input class name so that it's styled. And the most important piece is make sure that the type is set to text and the value is set to title. So for this particular input, it's going to be set to title. For the next text field. I'm going to change this input to text area, and we'll go down to text area here, and we want to change the closing tag to make sure that it matches the text area closing tag. And right here we want to change it from title to content, and this will make sure that once we click on the edit button, it's displaying the current content. Make sure that we add in the ID of content as well, and we'll go up to the input and add in the ID of title. After we've added in the ID, let's just make sure everything looks good, and it does. Right before the form closing tag, let's add in a button. This first button is going to represent update, and the next button is going to represent cancel. So we'll go ahead and style the update button, just adding in some Tailwind CSS here, giving it a little bit of margin, setting the color to lime green, which is going to match the other color, giving it some padding, giving it a little bit of margin top, and rounding the end. And from here, I'm just going to copy this class name as well. And the only thing I'll change here is I am going to change the color of it. I'm going to have the cancel button, that rose red, that's the same color as the delete button. And once we've done that, we'll click save. Let's scroll back up, and now we need to add in the on click handler for the edit button. So we'll do on click, and on click we want to grab the title, the content, and the note ID. And within that, we want to use the edit form. We want that to be displayed, and we want that edit form to have the note.title, the note.content, and the note.id. That's going to pass that information in, so that once we click on the button, we'll see that information displayed within the form. And once we have that added, we can go ahead and add in the same functionality for delete, since we've created the delete variable. So this will be an on-click function as well, and we want to call the delete note variable, or delete note function, excuse me. And within that, the only thing we want to pass into that is the note ID, and we'll create the functionality on the back end here in just a moment. But let's just make sure that the form looks how we want it to. So let's just go back home, hit edit, and for the most part, not bad. So let's just add in some margin top right here to give it a little bit of space. I don't like it grouped together. And great. So now that we have that, I think the next thing that we want to do is add in the functionality on the update form. So right here we have update. So let's add in the on-click functionality. So first we'll do type, and we'll make sure that it is set to submit, and then we'll do the on click, and within that we're going to pass in the update note functionality for this first one. This is just basically going to grab the information that we keyed in within this form, and we're going to update it, and the rest of that looks good. Now we need to do the exact same thing for the delete functionality. This one we can just do on click. Could have made this input or whatever we wanted to. We want to set the visibility to true. Well, we want to set it to true so that it is no longer visible, or that we want to set it so that it's not visible anymore, so that it's canceled out. So we're going to take the visibility from true to no. So that'll be explanation equal, that's false. So we have that added in here, so that looks pretty good. Now we can just test it. The cancel work, we hit edit, that looks good. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is create our update note and delete note API so that the functionality works, and we'll be good to go. So now let's go to our API directory, create a new file named updatenote.js. And within this, we want to add in the functionality to communicate with our database. So we'll need to bring in Mongoose. We'll need to import our note model. We'll need to create a asynchronous handler and make sure that we export default at the bottom. If we happen to get a request that's not a put, we're going to return an error. Otherwise, we want to grab the ID and query the database. And we also want to capture the title and the content from the body. From there, I went ahead and just copied and pasted the Mongoose connection from the previous video. Then once we set that connection, then we want to create our try catch block, and create a variable update note, which is going to grab and find the note by its ID. We're going to log it to the console, and we're going to, that status should be a 200. We're going to return it back to the browser in the status of 200, and we want to return it as JSON data. Okay, so let's give this a once over and refresh our window. And if we click on edit, and we get the drop down, and we cannot make any changes. So let me take a look and see what's going on here. I'll refresh it again, and I'm still getting the same thing. Can't click on update, so has to be something with my routes. I just saw that we got an error code 500. So okay, so let me do this first. We will go back into the folder here, and let's take a look at our index.js, and we are missing the onChange event handler. It looks like I did not add in the event handlers for the update form. That was my mistake, so let me go ahead and get those added now. We need to have the onChange event and set the title, and the title will come from the event.target.value. We need to do the same thing for the text area event as well. Add in this onChange event, and for this one, of course, we're going to be setting the content, and the content is going to come from event.target.value. Let's save this and refresh our screen, and let's see, we can now type, which is a good thing, and still getting the error when we click on update. So looking at the index.js, huge boo-boo right here. These should be backticks for the temperate literal. Right there where we have that $sign that we're passing in the note ID, that should be a backtick so that we can grab the exact ID, not quotes or comma or quotation marks. So that was my mistake. Let me go back, save it, refresh, and let's see here. Let's try it one more time. And okay, and we can type, and still getting the error. Okay, saying the server is closed. So let me do this. Let me refresh this one more time, and let me make this change. It should be note ID. I remembered it when I typed it, and I never went back and changed it, and it caught up with me now. So let me just go in, save it, refresh, hit edit, and let me remove the R's, hit update, and voila, it worked that time. Okay, so now that we finally have the update feature working, let's work on the delete note API, and we'll work on that now. So let's go to the API folder, and we'll create a file named delete note.js. And again, this could be named anything you want, but just make sure that it's consistent with your API request and what you named the folder or the route in the routes directory. So instead of typing all of that information over again, let me save myself some of that typing and copy from the update note file, and we're going to copy over the mongoose connection and the note model, and we'll create our asynchronous handler. Don't forget to export it, because it will not work if you don't export it. And from here, now that we have the handler set up, let's do a little bit of validation. If we get a request that's not delete, let's return back an error message, because we only want delete requests. And this will be a status.405.end. And if we are getting back a delete request, let's tell what we want done here. So the first thing we want to do is query the database for the ID, and we want to destructure that ID. That way we can work with all the content that belongs to the ID. Then we want to put in a try catch block, and this try catch is going to be very similar to our update. So I'm just going to copy it from the update notes.js and paste it into the try block here, and we'll take a quick look. Everything looks good. So next we'll go to the catch, and right here for the error we'll just do a console.log error, and from there we'll need to do another try catch block, since now that we're connected to the database, now we need to grab the ID and be able to update that ID accordingly. So we'll do a try catch here as well. We'll create a variable named delete note, and what we want this to do is to query the database for the ID that we just found, and we want to use the mongoose method of delete one, and what we want to delete is the ID, because once we delete that ID, the children will be, well, everything else that's associated with it will be deleted as well. And right here we want to return back a res.status of 200, and we can close that connection. And for the error message, we'll just do a console.log error and return back status.500. And the error message, we'll just send a error message note deleted. We shouldn't get any errors. This should be just a simple delete request. There's enough validations, but I'll just include this error message as well. And then right here, of course, we need to make sure that we are closing out our database connection. So we'll add in finally, and then we'll do mongoose.connection dot close, and we'll include the parentheses. So if we go in and we save this, and let's just test it out to see if it works, we'll refresh our browser and we'll click delete, and we see the post deleted. So, and we'll check our database just to make sure that it deleted from there as well. I probably should have checked it more, but we'll refresh it, and we're opening a new tab, and we can see we only have the one note in the database. And just to make sure nothing broke, because we did do a little bit of troubleshooting, let's add in one more note, and we'll add in a title, and we'll add in the content. And if we hit submit and it's on the new screen, let's go to home, boom, it's there. So everything is working properly. So I hope you enjoyed today's video and got something out of it. Any suggestions, feel free to leave them below. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Peace.